Dr. Sternglass knew the risk. A silent war, invisible twist. From the fallout clouds to the gamma rays, he saw the truth in a poisoned haze. They laughed him off, they turned away, but the radiation never fades away. Dr. Sternglass, can you hear us now? We ignored the warnings, don't know how. We breathe it in, it's in the breeze. The slow decay brings us to our knees. In the quiet towns where secrets seep, the silent burn beneath our feet. Sternglass warned as the world moved on, but in the ground the danger's drawn. The truth he spoke.
Hello, everybody.
Very deep, as fallout spreads while the children sleeps away. Dr. Sternglass.
It's called Dr. Sternglass.
We ignored the warnings, don't know how we breathe.
You'll find it at James Lucett's site on YouTube, along with hundreds and hundreds of other anti-nuclear songs. The biggest collection in human history, actually. More than the entire planet's anti-nuclear music combined, created by a single person. It's insane. It's quite a legacy. So by now I guess you figured things out. This is our last official show. Sounds so weird to say that, eh? It is what it is. The nuclear industry is a very powerful entity. And as we all know, this is not going to be easy to take on the nuclear industry. We last a long time. I think we should all be proud of ourselves. 709-589-4406. 4406 is the number. And we cover nuclear. We've been at this for a very long time. Pre-Fukushima, I was at it for, I think it was about 10 years before Fukushima happened. 9 years, I think it is actually, 10 years. I lost track. It seems forever. This is all I've ever done. And Fukushima can only be described as an extinction event. And we have the documentation to back that up. Hello, everybody. And so I'll address this, how things have played out in a little bit here. I want to talk about the extinction event for about 5-10 minutes, and we'll get into it. And because that's why we're all here. That's why we fight. And that's why we hold our head up high, because we took the moral, I'm not going to say compass, I'm going to say we took the moral high ground. And we should never regret doing that. So after Fukushima, we launched research expeditions, emergency research expeditions, from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska for 6 years. And if the truth be known, just doing that for 1 year, 4 to 5 months a year, is quite the feat on its own. But we got quite a shock into our system when we done it. And we made sure we approached it scientifically. The research expeditions, the field studies were very, very well thought out. It took a long time to build this whole operation and get it out on the ocean. So we finally got out on the ocean, and it rarely looked like that right there. It typically looked like this here. This was that night, and you can see a blown pontoon I had washed up on the rocks that afternoon. I'm heading back to shelter, believe it or not. That's a typical looking day for my research expeditions. And that night, unbeknownst to me, we had a hurricane. I never had radio coverage where I was to for the VHF to get the weather forecast. And it was right in hurricane season. And these are about the size of your thumb, those species you're looking at. And so we carried out research expeditions for 6 years, 4 to 5 months a year on the ocean. And so all the creatures you see in this are green screen because the real ones don't exist anymore. And officially now, these buildings didn't melt down. The pictures I'm showing you are no longer considered real. That changed on August 24, 2023, when the United Nations came out and said nothing got out of these buildings. Seems incredible that they would do something like that. But I guess it shows you the power they have. They have incredible power. They control your universities and your medias and your key positions in your government. And the government handed over those positions willingly to what's known as UN. The censorship on last night's video was extraordinary. I guess they realized I was finally facing the facts. We'd done multiple appeals. My pension was cancelled when I announced. What was interesting about that, my pension got cancelled 2 days after I announced we were going to take the fight to the nuclear industry through the universities. I was going to pursue lecture halls, and we did a few weeks ago, and we were still trying to tighten that up. It's a difficult process. And then go into universities and do these presentations. And so I guess they figured the best thing they could do is defund me. And after 2 appeals, I was denied both, the second one today. And so I've been packing all day. Such a strange thing to say. And there's nothing I can do about it. I got to face reality. I'm not in a very good position here right now, to tell you the truth. But we do have an extinction event. We have all the whales, the gray whales in particular, acknowledged as emaciated. Severe emaciation. And so just let me talk about the research expeditions for a few minutes. And we'll bounce back and forth. Radiation levels on the United States West Coast spiked to over 1 million times normal. This was the French government, the IRS, and French government experts on nuclear and radiation risk. And it was 1 million to 10 million times cesium-137 of what was out there pre-Fukushima. So you could be talking 30 to 40 million atoms per cubic meter of air of cesium-137. And each atom would pulse energy 600 feet every second for 300 years. So that's not going away for at least another 285 years. The problem is it never stopped melting down. The model you're looking at, the depiction right here of the radioactive fallout, is only based on 7 days, that's until the 18th of March. This was their actual model coming up. This one is based on I believe it's based on 16 days. And you're at day 20 right there. So this is the 31-day model, rather. So that's day 20, the entire planet covered in cesium-137. It can't travel by itself, but there was a lot of evidence, particularly the documentation. This is all the documentation, is the authentic documentation. So we launched emergency research expeditions, and we went to war against this industry for well over a decade hardcore. There was a lot of confusions originally. It was very difficult to source the information, to find out what was real and what wasn't real, which buildings were which, what looked like what. And so when we get to the pictures behind me is the pictures I take, and the pictures to your left is what it's supposed to look like, and what it looked like in 2013. In 2013, this was a Neptunium dispersal based on 20 days, and it was based on a fraction of what was lost from the buildings. It wasn't based on the entire inventories. The nuclear fuel pulls the reactor cores from those buildings. And there was 4 buildings, and at the top of each of the building, Frank von Hippel, professor, was suggesting there was up to 8 reactor cores at the top of each building. These are boiling water reactors. They have 70 in the United States that are identical, and they keep the reactor core stored at the top of the buildings. The Neptunium-239, these are 20-day model and 21-day model, are based upon just venting. So it's not based upon the actual meltdowns of a single reactor core, let alone what was estimated to be possible 36 reactor cores in the 4 buildings, because they stored the reactor cores at the top of the buildings, which were 190 feet, 65 meters, 19 stories, and they don't exist anymore. And so just because they refuse to acknowledge it doesn't mean that you shouldn't, and that well, we can't ignore it. This is life and death for all the species, as you're about to see. So this was a healthy coastline, 2011. And there's 27,000 islands. And you're talking about very dangerous territory, very fast tides, 19-foot tide exchange, 4 times a day, flow and ebb rate. And then there's probably 3 to 10 million rocks that are exposed at low tide because it has such a big tide exchange. So at medium tide, you can take your motor right off the back of the boat and never see the rock because there's so many what they call sunkers. And even at low tide, where you got an extra 3, there's 27,000 islands, but at low tide you got an extra 3 to 10 million rocks all around that coastline. So it's a very complicated thing to go out and do research expeditions, very difficult, very challenging. And as I was a commercial diver, I was very familiar with that coastline, but that didn't make it any less dangerous. So the species to your left are exterminated. And so I guess they don't want me going into the universities telling this story. And beyond, like, it's just incomprehensible that they could end my pension like that. And I appealed boat appeals. I thought I'd done a great job. Apparently I didn't. And I got the typical no reply answers. So you couldn't even answer to the reply. Which kind of reminds me of what YouTube done with my last site with the 24,800 subscribers I had for almost 5 years. I never lost one or gained one. When I was out looking for spiders, they took down that site. So the species to your left now are exterminated. They're not coming back. And this is not just to the British Columbia coastline. This is symmetrical now. We're seeing it around the entire planet, both Pacific and Atlantic. We can quantify through research expeditions of catastrophic damage. So the radioactive fallout, this model was Stanford University, based upon just a small venting. It's not based on the actual losses of the reactor cores. And this was a 19.5 day, 468 hour dispersal. This is the Plutonium study, by the way. That's what I looked like 5 years ago. Some difference. It's the way it goes when you're when you run yourself to the ground, right? And so one of the few acknowledgments we've seen for the industry, for the government, for the entities out there, acknowledgement of the species, and they generally refuse to acknowledge the species, they're gone. But there was this one candid story that showed up. The bodies are swollen by cancerous tumors. Now they're talking about the species in the tidal zones. And what they're saying is that cancer, which has never happened in any of these species in human history, was jumping like a virus from one species to another. And scientists said it was beyond surprising, and I definitely agree with that. It was such an incredible diversity on that coastline of the Pacific Ocean. And this is why I went back for 5 more years. And so I had to stay out there as long as I could. Because it's very expensive, very difficult to fund these research expeditions. It was enormously expensive. And some people could donate, some couldn't, and then some others couldn't, the other ones couldn't. And if I stayed out there, it was less expensive. And so we punched in the research expeditions to see if the species to the left recovered. And they didn't recover for 5 more years. We're currently on the East Coast doing research expedition. The species to your left, they didn't deserve to be exterminated permanently from the planet. And in order to exterminate the species, this is the interesting part about this, is that a glass of the ocean water would have the eggs and larvae of all the species that I'm showing you, right? And there would be 1 billion creatures in a glass of water. A single glass of water would have 1 billion creatures. And 75 to 100 million of them would be the phytoplankton, which is the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, and the carbon sequestering chain. The Pacific Ocean made 52% of the oxygen on the planet. But the ocean itself was a soup of what you call a soup of life, or what I describe as a soup of life, because it would have 1 billion creatures per glass of water. And so this time of the year, you wouldn't be able to see very far into the ocean because it would be even more, because all these species would be reproducing. And they reproduce by milk, etc., etc., etc. So the ocean would be very, very muddy looking, but it was just a soup of life. And now when you look at the ocean, it's crystal clear, and you can see really deep. And to a lot of people, that's beautiful, and it probably is. But it's not normal. It's not healthy. And so this planet is in real trouble, and we have very few voices, unfortunately. And so the reality for me is I'm in a rock and a hard place now. I don't have a pension, which paid my bills, paid my rent. My rent was $700 a month. And right now, because it's been almost a month, I owe $300 on my phone bill. I owe $100 plus on my light and power, and I owe $100 plus on my internet, and $700 for my rent. And I can't make that payment. And so I will lose everything in a matter of 2 weeks. It's all gone. And I'll be homeless, which doesn't seem real, but I'm painfully aware that it is real. And I don't have an option now. Now, I started up two companies 3 weeks ago when they originally came after my pension. And I never got a single phone call. These are really sweet business ideas. And I'm advertising it, but I don't get a single phone call, which would save my ass, right? Like, if I picked up 3 or 4 jobs a week, I can cover all my expenses easily and even get a hit, even though I'm not healthy enough to work. I'm certainly not healthy enough to be homeless, but apparently that's not an option. And so I'm dealing with it the best I can. I comprehend, and I understood several years back that this was most likely what they were going to do to me. We talked about this before, how this was possible, right? Because that's the reality. We don't live in fantasies, we live in reality. And we're so dedicated to this story and to the species and to the health of the planet and the people and the ecosystem. And we fight with every fiber in our body because it's the moral and ethical thing to do. And because that's our calling. It's not an option not to fight. And so theoretically, I'm not going to just disappear or something like that. I'm just not going to have the ability to do these shows, for instance, or make a bid, or a bunch of other stupid, normal stuff everybody takes for granted. And I don't know how to fix that. I don't understand how to fix that. I'm very unhealthy, right? spent a decade in a hospital bed and I had to learn to walk again. And I'm still, I just had, 2 years ago, I had 7 stents put in. But it's hard to appreciate how cruel this industry actually is until you look at the nuclear industry itself. Radiation experts, terrifying how the Pacific ecosystem has collapsed since Fukushima. Plutonium and uranium suspected of spreading through the food chain. So the radioactive fallout never goes away, and it poisons everything. But it takes, for humans, because we're at the top of the food chain, it manifests in heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, and for the species. For everything I'm talking about for humans is magnified dramatically for the species. So your heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. But you're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless because your immune system and everybody else's is compromised, particularly the elderly and the children. And in the children's thyroid and skeletons are saturated with isotopes, so they're producing radioactive hormones for the development of their entire lives and the development, which is like 20, 25 years, and they're producing radioactive stem cells. And this is going to be true for all the species. And because it takes a few decades to really start showing up in the lower species, we targeted the species. And thank goodness that we done what we done. Thank goodness that we stuck to our guns and we punched in as much research as we could. Because we can quantify our assertions through the field studies, right? It was the most important thing that this planet, I think, has ever done, is we went out and we documented it. So instead of taking the industry's propaganda machine narrative, we just went out and done our own research, and we quantified it with the documentation. We took hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pictures. And my site, of course, now is not up no more. I couldn't afford to renew it. A few days. It ran out actually yesterday or today. I can't even remember now. There's been a lot of stress for me today. And so what I like to do is try to raise, over the next number of days if I got to, is try to raise around $1,600, $1,700. And then that means I don't have to live on the street in 2 weeks. It gives me a few more weeks to adjust with the new world that I'm about to face. And to cover my outstanding bills which are dedicated to this, what I do, right? The internet, of course, light and power, you got to have it anyway. And my phone bill. So I'm going to give up my phone, but I'm going to keep my phone number. But I don't want to be trying to come back from everything and have all these bills piled on my shoulders. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody. Because most people will say, well, I'm going to take the money and survive on the money. But the best way to do it is pay off all my bills so that when I try to claw my way back, I'm not met with all these obstacles. And they might not seem like obstacles to the average person, but to someone like me who's been not very healthy for so long, everything is an obstacle. It's an incredible obstacle. And I wouldn't change anything. I don't regret anything. I don't regret all the sacrifices, all the heartbreaks, and all the sleepless nights, and all the all of these videos we produced, and I've produced well over 3,000 presentations, and I produced well over 600 radio interviews. That speaks to a passion, right? That speaks to compassion and passion. The heartbreak of it was nobody, I went out looking for people like myself, right, that were saying, hey, guess what, right, this is how this works, this is how that works. And we couldn't find that. Lucky for me, I had a history. When I got injured, I got interested in nuclear because I was in a hospital bed for a decade. And at that time, all the universities were putting their curriculum, their daily classes in videos online. And so I was studying every day at Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Oxford, MIT, etc., all the biggest shakers and movers. I had amassed at the end of a decade, I think it was around 7,000 lectures on nuclear. I was fascinated by it. I didn't understand it. I think the reason it was because, I had got injured as a commercial diver, and I needed something that didn't have memories for me. I couldn't listen to music because I would remember all, I had a really good life, and then I got injured. I was a commercial diver, was living high, making enormous fortunes every day. And all of a sudden I wasn't. I was in a hyperbaric chamber and things weren't looking good. And I got that, right? But, I was pretty rough shape. So I had to climb my way back. It took 10 years to learn to get out of a hospital bed, and then 5 years to learn to walk again. And I ended up on the ocean doing research expeditions because we couldn't find anybody out there telling us how things were. And the way it played out was quite interesting. But once I got out there and seen all the species were missing, now we had this kind of documentation, right, before I went out there. Not necessarily this one, but we had a lot of documentation like this. And each of these headlines you're looking at are actually a compilation of multiple stories from different mainstream medias. And they were aggregated at this site that doesn't exist anymore. And underneath it, they would link, they would have a paragraph from each of the medias, and that would link back to the original mainstream media story. And so each of these headlines were really good at conveying the enormity of the reports. So, you didn't have to read all of these stories. Somebody else done it for you, gave you the synopsis, and beneath it links to all the stories so you can make up your own mind. That's a pretty good, cool thing, right? And thank goodness I had aggregated as an absurd amount of this stuff. And I found this very frightening because it was very difficult to get honesty. Even these sites weren't quite able to give you the enormity or the horror of what we were dealing with. And so the research expeditions started, and we just went for it. And then because the species were missing, as I showed you earlier, to your left, the species to your left are missing, and to the right, what was left. So you had to go back each year to see if the species to your left recovered. They didn't. They're permanently gone. That's an extinction event. Hence the title of the show tonight, An Extinction Event. And surge in babies being born with extra arms, legs after Fukushima. Field officials know the cause is radiation. And the nurses say that many are getting abortions to avoid inconvenient babies. High numbers of stillbirths. Many people reporting cancer even far away from Fukushima. And it's really interesting how we don't have anybody on the planet doing what I'm doing, running educational programs. It's very concerning, to say the least, right? So, suggesting that cancer outside of Fukushima, the number of cancer patients, now, when I found this, I was like shocked. Japan's National Cancer Center, this is 2012, said the number of patients, cancer patients, rose by 865,000 in a single year, the year after Fukushima. And so what could really be the catalyst behind that besides Fukushima, right? And they never released the statistics after that. And so not everybody had health care. Not everybody was diagnosed. And cancer is not the only illness or disease or autoimmune deficiency or injury. But they actually acknowledged that all the species to the left had died of a virus cancer, where the cancer jumped from species to species and exterminated. And that's why all the species were exterminated. That was the official. Now, they didn't promote that after that, but that story came out. That was an official narrative in the mainstream media, that species to your left had died of cancer, of mysterious cancer from one species to another species, when we've never heard tell of something like that before. And the British Columbia coastline, the California coastline, the Alaska coastline looked like that pre-Fukushima. Now it all looks like this. And so the migratory birds would go into, every year we're able to land to your left and supplement their migratory diets. And at the top of the, up in the forest area were 30,000 insects, and they're gone too. We know this because we went out and done the research. And Southern California, I think it was 2013, Southern California fishermen were skunked, haven't seen a squid, and they used to get 10,000 pounds a day. Now, I grew up as a kid, and we would go out and jig squid in the harbor so we can bait up the cod gear, the hook and line cod gear. And so as a kid of 13, I was on the ocean full time, and every crack in my hand was wide open, every crack in each finger was wide open. And every morning, a 13-year-old kid, I would soak my hands at 3 a.m. in a glass of salt water, and so I can loosen up my hands enough so I can eat my breakfast. And then by 3:30, we would go, the boat was right in front of the house. We had a little moorage, a little stage, and a little very rudimentarily wharf built there. And you would take your cotton gloves and you would dump it in the ocean, even in the dead of winter. And you would wring it out and then put them on your hands, and it would sting like hell. But then your hands would be okay, and it would warm up. You had to stick it in water to warm your hands up, because that's the way real cotton would work. And so we would go out and jig these squid every day. You take it all for granted. You thought life would never change, and now you might never see that again. And that's a keystone species. There's many, many species dependent upon squid, many different types of whales. Usually 10,000 pounds a day, complete crashes at the oyster hatcheries. Sardines, mackerels are missing, / they're exterminated. Now, they're still out there. There's still food out there for the whales, but all the whales are emaciated. How does that work? Particularly when it comes to killer whales, the apex predator, which can eat over 300 different species, and does, including birds and otters and whatever's out there, that they can eat chunks, parts of it for minimum. Well, it's the bioaccumulation of radiation. This is not a story they want me telling in the universities. I'm still not going to be given up. I'm still not, hopefully, going to be going away. I still have intentions of doing presentations at a university. In fact, even more so now at right across the country. Because I don't know how to give up, but unfortunately right now I'm not in a position to do anything about it. So I have to find my way back over the next month or 2 or 3 or 4. I'm going to be homeless in the wintertime. Imagine that one. Someone like me. It's insane. And because I've been ostracized from the consensus out there, or from the... so the world doesn't know I exist for the most part, right? Or I would have a lot of support. And I do have support. I consider a lot of support right now. You know, people are doing what they can. They're doing the best they can. And I'm very fortunate to make it this far. And I have no regrets about it at all. We've sacrificed it all, unfortunately. We didn't expect them 100% to pull my pension. I would have never guessed that one at this early stage, but we have talked about that a few times over the years, that was a possibility. Because I realized that was my vulnerable point, right? If they somehow managed to get my pension away from me, then everything would fall apart. And that has always been one of my biggest fears, right? That could happen, and then now it's happened. And now the results are just, holy smokes. It is what it is, and there's nothing I can do about it currently. That doesn't mean I'm not trying, right? I can tell you that much. You see, I started up 2 businesses 3 weeks ago, and I also have been sending out excerpts from my book to be published on a feverish pitch the last number of days. I will never give up. I can assure you that much. The fight is never over for me, Pelican sites alarmingly deserted. Record number of 6 sea lions. Ultra rare whales appear after decades. So what you're looking at here is documentation, 2014. I'm going to go walk you through a whole bunch of documentation. Back in those days, there was dissenting voices. Back in those days, they weren't talking about avian influenza. They weren't talking about domoic acid. They weren't talking about... they were just... It was always a mystery. It was the biggest die-off here, the biggest die-off there, the biggest die-off ever seen here, the biggest die-off ever seen there. There was no rational excuse for what was happening. But the cover story slowly got built up by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and the media is very good at regurgitating it. They're all gone. Shock as the sardines vanish off California. The fishermen didn't find a single one all summer. Scientists, this is about the entire Pacific coast, Canada, Mexico, United States. We don't know why the young aren't surviving. Right, so back in the early years, it was dissenting voices. You know, in Canada, all the scientists were restricted from doing interviews, and they had to go through the current Prime Minister's office in Canada, which was Stephen Harper, and they would whoever was doing the interview had to be an authentic media, and then the questions they were allowed to ask, they would get from the Prime Minister's office, and the answers the scientists were allowed to give had to come from the same Prime Minister's office. And so a lot of the scientists couldn't comprehend why they weren't allowed to do their interviews without being scripted by no less than the official Prime Minister of the country's government agency. And so at one point, they organized marches across Canada in the major cities where scientists would walk down the cities with Scotch tape or with just colored tape on their mouth, and they were banging a pot. They're not allowed to say anything. And then they had press releases where they explained what the protest was about, was that they don't understand why they're being silenced because their voices were more necessary than ever because there was a lot of species in dire strait and they weren't allowed to talk about it. And apparently they weren't able to appreciate the enormity of Fukushima, which is understandable. Experts suggest bald eagles' deaths are related to Fukushima radiation. It's hard to have your national bird in your arm going through seizure. So there was a lot of connotations that the species were stressed from the radiation. But the academic community had done something quite interesting. They didn't come out and acknowledge that the fuel pools, even today, were gone from these buildings. Because that's a game changer, because the fuel pools will have decades of reactor cores, and each reactor core is a massive reactor core inventory, and the elements are splitting atoms. So when these reactors exploded, and you ejected the elements out of the buildings, a lot of it atomized and aerosoled and was dispersed worldwide, but a lot of it was in particulates that are still splitting atoms forever in our environment. So it's like a perfect weapon against a planet. And my biggest fear was always, a lot of them lately, was that we would find another planet and we would put nuclear power on it. Now the fuel pools are automatically splitting atoms forever into the environment. You can't contain it. So you don't need a nuclear meltdown or nuclear dumping or anything else. You just need fuel pools to eventually exterminate all the species on a planet. Because the fuel pools are splitting atoms. And the amount of atoms necessary to boil water for one person is an extraordinary amount of atoms. To boil water every day for 1 million people at 430 million people, 430 reactors worldwide, say 430 million people boiling water of atoms. When you take each year, when you're taking reactor cores out and putting in a fuel pool, it's still splitting those atoms. There's no containment. So the bioaccumulation of this lethal to everything with replicating cells, man-made anthropogenic element becomes catastrophic to the species and to the health and to the planet, the bacteria, the fungus in your forests and your meadows. And so we had all the academic community refusing to acknowledge that we lost the fuel pools even today, but all the way back then. And that is egregious and unforgivable, and it is catastrophic. Government investigators, acute hemorrhaging found in dead owls on the West Coast, not just eagles. Mortality began about 8 months after Fukushima explosion. Badly emaciated. So what we're seeing, what we're able to quantify over the years, is the species are accumulating radiation, and then what happens now is there can still be food there for them to eat, and they can still try to eat it, they can pick at it or whatever, but they're not able to uptake the nutrition into their body because they're producing so many white blood cells. Because the white blood cells are trying to repair the damage from the detonations of the isotopes every second in their body. So say they got millions of isotopes in their body exploding at the speed of light every second. It's wrecking chromosomes and DNA in cells, each one of them. Your body tries to repair that every second, it can't keep up with it, and it has to attack the source. So that's true for all species. So here we are 14 years down the road, and we're onto the 46 million migratory species are missing. The seabirds, we had the biggest migratory seabirds, and so millions of generations have come here to raise their fledglings. So you would expect 46 million migratory birds each year. There's nothing here. There is no birds feeding in the ocean, which unfortunately we've been having difficulty documenting last year and this year. And right now we're not able to, barring a miracle over the next week, I'm just going to have to find a way to fight my way back so I can be back here trying to educate the population. It is what it is. And the truth is even worse than I'm telling you. Mortality began 8 months after Fukushima exploded. I'm sure I make a lot of nuclear people happy tonight, pro-nuclear communities, that they're celebrating with the last of the caviar and champagne. Badly emaciated. This was the consensus, the word emaciation. And today it's almost every species we're talking about is going to be emaciated. Drastic plunge in baby California pelicans. This is 2014. It was a complete failure of all the breeding colonies, not just pelicans, right, but all the seabird species in particular, because they were studied heavily. And because there were so many of them each year in the migratory runs. Right now we got all the gray whales, which is just, it's unimaginable that all the gray whales are emaciated. And they lost 50-something% of the population since, even if you go all the way back to 2016, right? So post-Fukushima is where we've seen all of these catastrophic events play out. Just let me touch on the gray whale die-off for a second. Because this one really stings. All the whales they're seeing, the gray whales, on the migratory run. Now last year, the whales were already in poor shape last fall when they began their 12,000-mile migration to breeding, which is in Baja, Mexico. And none of the babies survived. The young whales survived the southerly migratory trip. So when they showed up at the nursery for having their babies in Baja, Mexico, they showed up with no babies. This is the first time we've seen that one. But we have seen the emaciated whales, many years before this. But now all of the remaining whales, which is around 13,000, are severely emaciated. All of them are severely emaciated. Last year, on their southerly run, and now they're emaciated now on their northerly run. And the whales they're seeing, even from the shoreline, they're able to see that they're extremely emaciated. You can see the rib cages sticking out, the shoulder blades sticking out. And the way it works, because you got all these migratory whales, you can't have healthy whales and emaciated whales on a migratory 12,000-mile trip, right? Because whales are not like bullies where they're hogging all the food. It doesn't work that way in the ocean. So they'll make these claims that some whales are healthy and others are emaciated, but it's simply not true. Right? Because logic and statistics and science dictate that you can't have thousands of emaciated whales right alongside of healthy whales because they all eat the same food, they have the same diet, and eat at the same time, and they travel together. And so they were emaciated all the way south. Now they're headed north, and they're showing up emaciated and dead everywhere. They have bulging ribs, the shoulder blades and vertebrae, visible even from the shore. It's really just horrific. No, it's the end. It's an extinction event. That's as plain as it gets that this is an extinction event. It does, if you can read between the lines, there's nothing more plain that when these big whales are showing up, there's still food out there. It's just they bioaccumulated so much, there's not enough, but there's some out there. So for them to show up emaciated, as they have been for many years now, post-Fukushima, it's partly due to the fact that they can't uptake nutrition anymore because they have so much radiation in their body, that they're producing so much white blood cells that they're not able to uptake nutrition. 2014, just 1% of the usual number of baby California pelicans, nearly complete failure to breed, and only 20 newborns in an area where 10,000 were expected. I've never seen anything like it. And this was the common theme post-Fukushima for mass species die-offs. But move ahead to 2021, 22, 23, 24, 25, they started introducing narratives like avian influenza, highly pathogenic, pathogenic avian influenza. But they were saying that the flu was jumping from species to species, much like I showed you earlier where they say the cancer was jumping from shellfish to starfish to oysters to scallops to abalones to kelp to algae to shrimp. It just simply doesn't work that way. Right? The avian influenza has been around for millions of generations. It's never a jump species. Now, theoretically, something else is there, right? So their immune systems are so compromised that they have the symptoms of the flu, which is typical, by the way, of radiation poisoning. You do have a symptoms that is similar to what the flu is like, right? But your body is much more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless. I wonder if the nuclear industry will miss me, because surely they must like having they must like having a boogeyman they can hate. What are they going to do now? They got no one to hate is another question. They never asked themselves, because they won the battle. Now they won the battle. They finally destroyed me, and that's the end of it. I'm going to try to fight my way back. I'm going to do everything I can not to go away. I'm probably going to have to do fundraisers so I can keep this going for a few more months, or hopefully another year, or whatever the case may be, and maybe we'll catch a break and the planet will come to its senses. I'm not the bad guy, right, for doing what I'm doing. I'm really not. I'm dedicated to everybody, including the crazy nuclear industry. I can't fight for protection of everybody and exclude anybody. See? Only 20 newborns in an area where 10,000 are expected. I've never seen anything like it. Mind-blowing die-off in the Pacific is far worse than anything ever seen before. Experts alarm over what's happening in the ocean. The deaths are puzzling the government scientists. I've never heard of such a thing anywhere in the world. And these are words we should all remember, because the original stories, which is what I'm showing you tonight, are the most important stories, because they tell you the story. And most of it's in non-biased ways. Beaches full of bodies, countless carcasses. Explosions at Fukushima 1, 3, and 4 may have caused the inventories of nuclear rods to be lost from the spent fuel pool. So there was speculation, but the evidence was so overwhelming that was what happened. Just bear with me. I'll bring up some more pictures for you now in a second to help articulate that. This is my last official show. We hope we get a lot more shows in, but this is my last official show. I'm actually packing as we speak, right? I don't know where I'm going to put it. I don't have anywhere to bring it. It is what it is, and all I want to do is fight for this planet, fight for these species. That's all I care about. That's the only thing that's important. And I think I'm right by saying it. So here's major media: CBS, Seth Dorn, BBC, Rupert Winfield Hayes, CCN, and Anna Curran, ABC Australia, Cecilia Vega. They're claiming they're 190 feet up in the air, looking down on the fuel pool of reactor to your left. So the building to your left should be a 19-story, 65-meter building. It clearly not, and doesn't exist. It's just rubble lift, right? It's a stump lift that should have been razed to the ground. So when they talk about 1, 3, and 4 may have caused the inventories of spent nuclear fuel rods, they're talking about up to 8 reactor cores at the top of each of these buildings. So they're talking about 9 reactor cores missing. The media came out and said, no, they're not missing. We're actually getting the fuel out of the pools. The 9 reactor cores that are stored at the top of these boiling water reactor buildings. Don't worry. Don't listen to Durnford and the conspiracy theorists. We're the media. We wouldn't lie to you. We're at the top of the building and we're getting the fuel out of the pool. So who are you going to believe? A typical person is probably going to believe them, not me, right? They'll say, well, Dana, I watched them, Dana. They were at the top of the fuel pool. And let me play one of those videos for you, because it's quite interesting. It's quite interesting when you hear it. They're not even in Japan. There's 70 identical reactors in the United States. They're identical color, identical schematics. This is ABC Cecilia Vega. She's going to claim she's at the top of that building. She's one of the many ones. It's not just those 4 medias that done that. And I might have to adjust the volume a little bit for you in a moment.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor into a safer location.
Into a safer location. So they're saying they're taking the fuel out of the pool and they're putting it somewhere safe. Can you wrap your mind around that? Spent fuel pool at the number 2 is steaming, also white haze above number 3. But the incredible facet of the story is that on the 15th, March the 15th, 2011, day 4, you had, now if just one of those reactors blow up or melt down, you can't get near the other ones. You had 4 reactors blow up, and at the top of each of the reactors was maybe, if not more, maybe a bit less, but probably 8 reactor cores in the 2 fuel pools. This is not up for debate that they're gone, but the official story is that nothing happened, right? The official story is they got all the fuel out of the pool, not just reactor 4, but reactor 3 too, and everything is good. And so for the average person who refuses to acknowledge that the government is not totally honest, that's reactor 3, the stump of reactor 3. This was a plutonium mixed oxide reactor. That's the stump of reactor 4. Actually, here's the video of them pretending that they're at the top, that they're above. And these pictures look a bit grainy because it's a video. Once it starts, it looks normal again. So there's 2 fuel pools, one over there and one right up there. And the reactor core is at the top of the buildings. Because this is basically my last show, I might be doing some fundraisers over the next week to try to hang on for a little while more before everything finally falls apart. And it might not work, right? I'm just going to do the best I can until...
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
And so this is what we're up against. We're up against all the media worldwide, all the universities refusing to call them out on it. And we have a real full-blown extinction event playing out. And we're into the dying days now of the species. This has been going on for 14 years. Japan's government papers after 3/11 spent fuel pool number 4 at a boiling point. It is empty. So there was some emissions. This was May the 16th, 2012 that came out. And again, each of these stories below it would have been 5, 6, 7 links and paragraphs from each media that have reported on this. But these headlines are the basic synopsis. So typically if you clicked on the blue, now this site doesn't exist anymore, but if you clicked on the blue, that would be a link, and that would take you over to the Daily Mail. This was March 18, 2011. So this is day 7. Radiation is streaming into the atmosphere of this building here after number 4 fuel pool boiled dry. Now, the way it works that if the fuel pool boils, it doesn't need to boil dry. It just needs to expose the upper layer of the fuel. And the fuel, each fuel rod is 12 feet, weighs 18 pounds, and there's 100 in assembly. So once the top is exposed, because it's already gone through a chain reaction, it'll catch fire immediately. It's like if you take it out of the fuel, out of the water, it catches fire immediately. It burns at around 1800 degrees from the zirconium cladding. Inside the zirconium cladding is fuel pellets of uranium, plutonium. They're also clad in zirconium. So once the outside ignites, it'll burn the zirconium cladding of the fuel pellets, and then they'll ignite. So it's burning at 1800 degrees right away. Now, it doesn't need oxygen to burn, so it can burn underwater. Once it starts burning, it'll burn underwater at around 7, 8, 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. And that will boil off all the water fairly instantly, and you'll end up... Now, the reactor explosions, let's talk about that for 1 second. The reasons the reactor exploded wasn't because of hydrogen. It was because the reactors are at 1,000 pounds per square inch. So they need 1 million gallons of water a minute. They need 1 million gallons of water a minute. They need 1 million gallons of water a minute, and that's equal to 4,500 tons a minute. They need 1.45 million one-ton pickup trucks of water each day in 24 hours. They need 70 one-ton pickup trucks of water each second for each building, and they need 4,000. So think of 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks with 2,200 pounds, 1,000 liters of water in the back of each of them, going past your front door every minute. 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks going past your door each minute, 1,440 minutes a day every day. Try crossing the road there, right? Guess good luck. And they also have to dump their load, 70 of them every second. So there's an enormous amount of water needed to keep it from heating up. So when you lost your water supply, you went from 1,000 pounds per square inch, and not just slowly, but started climbing steadily to 1,000, 1,500 to 1,800 to 2,000. And when you get up to these, it's the same thing as filling up your car tire. Imagine putting your inflator on your car tire and walking away. And then eventually what happens, your tire will explode, right? Well, that's what happened to these buildings. That they weren't hydrogen explosions. Now, there was a hydrogen explosion once they detonate from the high pressure, because you had displaced all the oxygen. So once you introduced the oxygen, because you produced the hydrogen from the nuclear meltdown, And then what happens is you'll see a flash at each of these explosions when you watch the videos. That is hydrogen exploding. Hydrogen is known to do that. But that's not what caused these catastrophic explosions. That was because you had no cooling, and you need 1.45 million one-ton pickup trucks every day of water to keep them cool. Otherwise, the temperature and the pressure rises. And like, try wrapping your mind around the fact that each day in front of your house, there's 1.45 million one-ton pickup trucks with a ton of water, 1,000 liters in the back of it, driving past your house each day in 24 hours. 1.45 million. So each nuclear power plant needs 2 gas, oil, and coal plants dedicated to it just to supply electricity. They can't supply it to themselves, right? High radiation levels around the plant prevented helicopters from dumping water on the spent fuel rods at Fukushima. Now, last night's video was censored heavily, but that video actually showed you a way forward, how to produce electricity. It's a really important video, that one last night. That was a totally different video last night, right? I'm under a lot of stress, and now it's starting to manifest, and so high radiation level, and I work good under stress, by the way. In fact, I perform way better when I'm stressed, but I'm not typically stressed as much as I am currently, and probably will be for quite a while to come. High radiation levels, it is what it is, and I'm going to deal with it. I'm not going to pretend it's not happening. I'm going to bury my head and say, poor, pitiful me. I'm going to get busy. I'm busy. I haven't stopped. In the last 3 weeks, you'll be surprised at how many things I tried in order to keep this whole operation moving forward. High radiation levels around the plant prevented helicopters from dumping water on the spent fuel rods. So if the helicopters can't dump water, now all 600 helicopter pilots at Chernobyl died, right? But if helicopter pilots can't dump water on it, how can the homeless and the destitute go in there? They can't, right? Academics can't. So another facet of this story that is lost in translation, and if you go into my site and look up 736 mystery pictures, and if you or you can go back to the 14th anniversary, you'll find that. And you'll also find along the way where we've done presentations on MIT, Harvard, and I can't remember another major shakers and movers from the original presentations of Fukushima. Very interesting stuff. But 6,375 spent fuel assemblies is around 10 million pounds. This was the common spent fuel pool. That was right behind reactor number 4. It was right behind reactor number 4, across the street from here, and basically across the street from reactor 3. But it's low compared to these skyscrapers, these 19-story buildings. And so the common spent fuel pool, the original pictures, the 736 mystery pictures, I've done multiple presentations on these pictures. But if you go watch that particular video, because you get better each time, clearly, there was 736 pictures released in the 10th year, before the 10th anniversary. And I think it was January. And I'm the only person I know that ever covered those pictures. And they were from a high-quality drone flying over Japan, Fukushima. All the pictures of the common spent fuel pool are redacted. And reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4, and reactor 6. And another spot on the site, up in the north end, the southwest corner. So why would he redact the pictures of the common spent fuel pool if nothing happened? And you can see all the debris piled up behind the common spent fuel pool, all the transport truck containers that are piled up from the tsunami. Tsunami ran right through it, which most likely mean we lost those inventories too. Aerosol plutonium from Fukushima detected in Europe, spent fuel indicated. Now this wasn't all aerosol. A lot of this is particulates that are splitting atoms. And wherever they land, they'll be splitting atoms for millions of years. We have buried the planet in radioactive fallout. It's extraordinary. It really is. The species to your, reactor 3 to your left, reactor 4 behind me, they refuse to acknowledge that that is gone. That's reactor 3 blowing up. Now, when you watch this video, you're going to see big chunks falling back down in a second. and remember this is slow motion, those big pieces falling back down are the fuel pools and the reactor cores ejected right into the buildings. The plume is caused by the inventory catching fire, because it immediately catches fire, and that's why the plume gets bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes up, right? Let's watch it again. So that was the hydrogen from the reactor 3, pressure built up so much it exploded. Not from hydrogen though. But once the hydrogen was introduced to oxygen, then it detonates. So they banned the food by 55 countries and 14 prefectures, and rightfully so. And that's a really concerning picture from the mainstream media in Japan, where this farmer, he's harvesting rice, golden rice, right alongside of thousands of one-ton bags of radiation in a nuclear wasteland. In a nuclear wasteland, where he's not allowed to live, and he's not wearing a paper suit. Not that that can protect you, but what that means is it's for harvest, it's for food. If he's wearing a paper suit, it's experimental. If he's not wearing a paper suit, it's for food. That's half the country where the food was banned, and appropriately so, including Tokyo, with 36 million people. The food was banned by 55 countries because now those people that done that were administrations were replaced with other administrations, and then the restrictions were removed in most of the countries. Fukushima plume model showed 1 million atoms per square meter. That's when you see square meter instead of cubic meter. Cubic meter is airborne. Square meter is disposition radioactive fallout on the ground. So 1 million atoms per square meter is an absurd amount on the ground. And it can't travel by itself, of course, right? And this was one of the depictions of the plume based on 20 days of radioactive fallout. This is just 20 days. So you got a continuous plume covering almost the entire planet in just 20 days. And all the models are showing us the same from all the major institutions. Rain with 20 million particles now, of radioactive iodine-131 per liter fell in the United States during post-Fukushima peak. So you can't be an iodine-131 unless you're pulsing energy every second. But Simon Fraser University, is where the study came out of, made the assertions that there's only 10 pulses of energy for 20 million atoms. Particles. And in this case, it's particles, which is way worse. Now, this is enough to saturate the thyroid glands of every species. This is a continuous plume covering the entire planet we're talking about. And you got 10 times more iodine-132, 30 times more iodine-133. The iodine-132, the iodine-133 are 9 times more effective than the iodine-131 at ionizing and radiating the thyroid glands of every species, and your children, and you and your friends and your families, your loved ones. And the damage is forever. Right? The damage lasts, the harm is forever, but it doesn't travel by itself, right? And then there's 31 times more iodine-129, and that's what a study from Ottawa, Canada clearly shows us. Transport rapidly to Canada, United States. Elevated levels continued for many months because it was a continuous plume. Now, this stuff got a 15 million year half-life. There's 10 half-lives. That means it's never going to go away. That means it's here forever. Excuse me. So this stuff is never going to go away. And again, the iodines in particular, they end up in the thyroid glands. You can't have all of this absurd. These are absurd numbers we've never even heard tell of pre-Fukushima, even conceived. In fact, if I wrote a book pre-Fukushima of this I'm showing you tonight, I would be laughed right out of everywhere I went because it was ridiculous to suggest that this could happen, and that it would have these types of effects. But post-Fukushima, I'm still laughed out of existence, even though it actually happened and it's real, and it's not a maybe, it's not a pretend, it's not an almost. This happened 14 years ago, and it's still hemorrhaging out. So you can't have all of these gammas, which is the iodines, without bone seekers. And so this is enough on its own to saturate the thyroid glands of every species. And it did. And that's why we're looking at an extinction event. But the same attributes for bone seekers, which means all the species have permanent radioactive hormones and permanent radioactive stem cells. Okay, let's keep going. So another study, as I showed you at the beginning, I think this one, was gamma. This was cesium-137 at 10 million times pre-Fukushima level per cubic meter of air. So this plume, as I showed you this earlier, that plume, this one was the 16-day model. This is the French government. This is spike. So read that again. Radiation levels in the United States West Coast spiked. And Canada's on the West Coast too, British Columbia, right? But it didn't just go to the West Coast, but that's where they first found it. Spiked 1 million times normal after Fukushima explosion, the French government experts. And so when you got that model, and you look at this model of cesium-137, which is pulsing energy 600 feet every second, you're going to have all the other isotopes. You're going to have the xenons, you're going to have the iodine 129s, the 131s, 132, 133. You're going to have the xenons. You're going to have all the other isotopes, your plutonium, uranium, americium, neptunium, strontiums. And it's going to manifest in the species. So in 2016, they started acknowledging unusual mortality events. It's gotten much, much more severe since then. The humpback whales, after 2009, in 2022, I believe it was, because they take photographs of all the whales, and through artificial intelligence, they were able to say that there was, on top of an unusual mortality event, there was another 7,000 whales missing. An extra 7,000. It was the same thing for the gray whales, by the way, and the minke whales, and it was the same thing, not just for the North Atlantic right whales, the beak whales, the sperm whales. In fact, the beak whales in the United Kingdom, they had found over 1,000 1 year, which is considered 10% of what would have died. You're not going to find everyone that died, right? Because the ocean is big and they sink and everything else. So finding 1,000 carcasses in different stages of decomposition, and we covered that back when it happened, the consensus was they were starved to death. They had no food in their stomach. They were emaciated. And they're very dependent upon one of the keystone species, the squid. They eat other species, but squid is their favorite, right? And for the beak whales, and you should never encounter them. They're deep offshore divers. They spend all their time on the ocean floor. And then we've seen mass die-off of, they say climate change likely played a role. Well, the climate was changed by 80 years of emissions from the nuclear industry. Carbon doesn't pulse energy every second. Radioactive fallout does. And radioactive fallout is the only emission that makes plumes that covers the entire planet. In this case, it's only 16 days. And carbon emission is very heavy. It doesn't travel very far. It gives you more trees, more insects, more puppies, more birds. It's a good thing, right? And so the industry had flipped the narrative and blamed carbon, which you were made of, by the way. And it was they have the media behind them. They have incredible amount of resources to push that narrative. And as you know, everywhere you go now, you'll read the word carbon. Carbon's going to get you. But it's simply not true. So back then, in 2022, was 10,350. The new numbers today are 14,000. And that leaves 13,000. There's 13,000 left. So a little over 50% of the are confirmed dead. Now, we covered this extensively. They call it food scarcity. We call it emaciation. They were not food scarcity. They died because there was no food, which means they died of starvation. And because they can travel 24,000 miles, 12,000 miles one way, 12,000 miles the other way before they typically start to die in mass from the emaciation, that's what we're assuming had happened. Now, we documented it. Deaths are puzzling the government scientists. 2016. I've never heard of such a thing anywhere in the world. Beaches full of carcasses, countless carcasses, officials. We want to know if it's related to Fukushima. Well, the industry, like I explained to you earlier, in Canada, wouldn't even let scientists have interviews without questions and answers being provided by Stephen Harper's government's office. So they were very controlling of the narrative even back then. Sickened animals, unlike anything we've ever seen, are eating themselves from the inside. Cancers, liver, pancreas, intestines shut down, infested with parasites, immune to antibiotics. Unprecedented catastrophe that caused the loss of 200,000 sea lions. Again, you're not seeing the words like avian influenza. You're not seeing the narratives that you're hearing today, right? Which they still can't back up. And just let me bring in some more supporting documentation. Because there was an unusual die-off. All the puffins are starved to death. All the whales are starved to death. Bear with me. Might have to go back one. Let me go here. I'll get it. There we go. Almost 3,500 sea lions. Now, some of these pictures are pretty difficult to look at, but they're trying to blame it on avian influenza. This is very important because it's most likely my last show. I'm still going to try. I don't want to go away. I don't want to give up. I don't want to stop. I'm never going to surrender. They pulled a fast one on me because I was going to get into the universities and share this documentation and start a real debate. I was going to bring the fight to them. That was the words I used, right, like 3 weeks ago. We're going to bring the fight to them this year. This is the year we have Fukushima breakout. Instead, looks like they've done it to me. Explosion of sea lion deaths in Peru amid a deadly flu outbreak. So for the average person, they'll read that, and these pictures are hard. Here comes the first one. This sea lion should weigh 600-700 pounds. This is severe emaciation. So the bird flu doesn't do that. Starvation does that. And so what they had done was they conflated the bird flu, and then the average person, now when they see an emaciated sea lion, honey, don't go over there because that's the bird flu, right? Because the average person can't perceive it, what's going on. And so it was 3,500 sea lions found dead due to the virus. See that? But the virus, and the next picture is hard to watch, this animal should weigh 6, 7, 8, 9, up to 1,000, 1,200 pounds. I used to dive with hundreds of these every day. I've dumped my weight belt and left it on the ocean floor more times than I care to remember. Way more times than you probably believe, because I couldn't control my fear of the sea lions. And they would do this wonderful thing when I look back on it. It was quite scary back then. None of them ever bit me. None of them ever hurt me. They just intimidated me. And so what they'll do is they'll swim at you. And remember, underwater, they look 25% bigger. That's not bird flu. That's starvation. I've never seen anything like that in my life. I never heard tell of anything like that. But Peru and the media worldwide is calling it bird flu. Bird flu doesn't have that attribute. It's an immediate nervous system damage, and they could die within 3 or 4 days. This takes months. So the sea lions would swim at you, because the males, so they can get 14, 15, 1,600 pounds. They're very graceful, by the way, underwater, and they'll swim at you. And at the last second, when they get right almost up and touching you, sometimes they'll stop right in your face. And a sign of aggression to a sea lion is expelling bubbles. And what am I doing? I'm there expelling bubbles all day, right? Because when you're trying to tell your friends that story, the last thing you want to say is I'm blowing bubbles, because everybody's going to say, who's Bubbles? So you always say, I'm expelling bubbles. And the sea lion does the same thing. And whoever runs out of oxygen first and goes to the surface is considered the loser. So a male sea lion would have 100, 200 female sea lions, and he likes to keep them up on the shore if there's anybody around. And they'll go down and challenge any creatures that comes in their territory. And so they'll swim at you all out, and at the last second they'll turn. And because they're 14, 15, 1,600 pounds, I seen an albino was probably 2,000 pounds. When they make that turn, you know how when you were young and there was a bar of soap in your bathtub and you would go like this a couple of times underwater and then wait a few seconds, 1,001, 1,002, and then the bar of soap would start rolling? That's what they do with me and everybody else. And out of a fleet of divers that we dove in this environment for years and years and years, I've never heard anybody say they've been hurt. Never physically touched. But I must admit, I was probably the biggest coward. I hate saying that, but it's the truth, and now's a pretty good time to acknowledge it. So coming out and suggesting that it was due to the virus, and that 3,500 sea lions, they're showing you these pictures. This is not avian influenza or anything close to it, by the way. This is starvation, see? Like the plot of a summer horror flick all along the Canadian Pacific coastline. Mussels are dying. Bodies are swollen by cancerous tumors. Unprecedented mutations allowing cancers to spread from one species to another like a virus. It's beyond surprising. Unprecedented mutations allowing cancer to spread. Now, I explained that at the beginning of the show when I showed you my research expeditions, just a short amount of that. We'll come back to that before the show is over. Historical crisis along the United States West Coast. We're facing a fishery disaster, an extinction threat for the salmon, loss of sardines, squid, sea urchins, kelp. Most of these headlines after 2014, for instance, would have been based upon my reports because I was out there 4 to 5 months a year, and that was the only source they would have had. I'm not saying all of these stories are applicable. I'm just saying a majority of these stories, the reports would have been quantified by my research expeditions because I was out there for 4 to 5 months a year, doing the best I could, and I think we've done pretty good. We covered the entire coastline year after year after year, hoping the species recovered, and they didn't. Extinction threats. And that, when you say the loss of sardines, that's the extinction threat too, for sardines, squid, sea urchins, kelp, and they weren't wrong. Unfortunately, they weren't wrong. West Coast bird die-off is the biggest ever recorded. Not avian influenza, the stomachs are completely empty. Now, this was the common murd. Common murd dies 600 feet all day. It feeds on anchovies and squid and sardines and krill. And so it'll dive 600 feet, it'll come up and get oxygen, it'll dive 600 feet. It'll do that all day. And it'll bring the food back to its nest where it has this fledgling and feed the fledglings, fly away, dive 600 feet, and feed all day. Now, they showed up emaciated by over it was confirmed over 1 million of the common murres. And at the same time was Cassini auklets, showed up at about 1.4 million on their migratory route in the same area. And they fed on microscopic animals, phytoplankton, zooplankton, very tiny pods and everything else, right? Microscopic animals, they're like skimmers. So you had two different spectrums of the food chain, two different birds, or birds from two different spectrums of the food chain showing up emaciated in the hundreds of thousands and ultimately over 1 million each, severely emaciated because the food chain was broken, right? When, of all things, the microscopic animals should have been there, right? Because there should be 1 billion creatures, 1 billion per glass of water. So this told you right off the bat we're in deep trouble. And death could reach many hundreds of thousands, a host of other freakish phenomenons. North America will not be safe from Fukushima radiation if the plant keeps leaking. Now, the plants weren't leaking. They had detonated. They had lost their entire inventories. Excuse me. So this was the original footage, the first month or so, right? This is what the buildings... this was at least week 3 or something. Now, any academic on the planet looked at these buildings. This is just 2 of the 4 buildings. Any academic looked at those in the nuclear industry would have known the fuel pools were gone. And there was some reports that the fuel pools were gone. They were quickly downplayed and shunned even, and those people were never interviewed again. Animals suddenly died on the West Coast right after the 2011 disaster. The whole world noticed this strange phenomenon. Fatally high levels of radioactive material have entered the ocean. Fatally high levels of radiation. Well, the whole planet got covered in a plume within 2 weeks, certainly within 30 days. So all the water was incredibly contaminated within 30 days. And that's forever, unfortunately. 100% death rates of the baby seals in the California coast. None have survived. starving, suffering from a shortage of food in the Pacific Ocean. Milkless moms, fish bleeding from the face, bloody entrails coming in the body. We're very much aware of the possibilities of radiation from Fukushima affecting the ocean. They've never seen anything like it. And all of these attributes we're talking about tonight are post-Fukushima. These are things we've never seen pre-Fukushima. Now, this was going on pre-Fukushima because of the nuclear industry's emissions, but Japan was a pulse event. And I can't stress that enough, that this was a pulse event for the entire planet and for every species in the forest, not just the oceans. In the meadows, we wrecked the bacteria and the fungus on land, and that's why you're seeing flash floods. And that's why you're seeing all this heat too, because once you took the bacteria and fungus out of the earth, the first meter or so of the earth, it doesn't soak up water anymore, and it doesn't break down the foliage in the litter from the meadows and the forest and everything else. And so when you get a lightning strike, you have all this foliage that would normally be heavy and soaking wet, and with all the biota, right, and the fungus and the bacteria breaking it down, that's gone. And so now the earth doesn't soak up the water, so when you get heavy rains, you have flash floods. The rains are the same, but now you're having flash floods because the earth won't soak up the water. When normally the earth would soak up the water, and that's why you never had the flash floods pre-Fukushima like you're seeing now. It was going on because the nuclear industry has damaged the planet in the first 70 years significantly. But Japan was a pulse event, unfortunately. And they took the worst route. They decided to cover it up. But you can't cover up the damage. You can cover it up, but you can't. It's not like you can't stop the damage, I guess is a better way to put it. Carcasses littering beaches from all on the Pacific coast of Alaska. And so when you get lightning strikes, the foliage in the litter, which tinder dried, it didn't break down because the bacteria, the fungus, the biota doesn't exist, wafers up and drifts 1,000 feet. And when it lands, you have these huge fires starting up all over the place. Complete reproductive failure. Unprecedented die-off has the potential to be the biggest mortality event in history, the most extreme they've ever seen. In Alaska, again, right, bird flu, avian influenzas, none of this was ever mentioned. Those narratives didn't really show up until in the early 20s. This was 2016. So the original narrative that they were trying to blame things on that showed up 2016, 2017 was domoic acid. It always, we followed up on all of those studies, they always turned out negative. The ultimate, they had died of starvation, all the species. And then, and this is important, let me remind you, that if you go to my playlist, mass species die-off of whales, birds, insects caused by. And so you can find everything right here. Right? We've done all these presentations on the die-off. We documented everything since I started this site a little over 3 years ago. My other site they took down when I was out looking for spiders had 24,800 subscribers for 5 years. I never gained one, never lost one. In 2 weeks, I might be living in a tent. And I'll be lucky if that's the case. I might be unlucky. Let me get back on track here. Mass die-off sea creatures from California to Alaska. Animals starving as the food chain continues to collapse. 2017. I was on the ocean during all of those. Mass starvation event plagued the West Coast. Scientists feels like I was doing nothing but counting dead animals. We hear that all the time, right? 2017, No fish out there anywhere over a large, very large area. What's happening? Where's the food? Total failure in reproductions, like nothing we ever observed before. Mass die-off reported in the Pacific Ocean. Unfortunately, it's not just Pacific Ocean, it's all oceans. Many animals on the seafloor is looking sick or dead. Everything's dying, dead, and dead. Experts investigate what's killing sea urchins and cucumbers in the Pacific Northwest. And for anybody that's going to donate, you can't donate to my site. My site doesn't exist anymore. I'm sure the nuclear industry will buy that up in the next while. You can only donate through PayPal. Links are in the bottom of my description if you can do it. That was a pretty good time. And you don't need a PayPal account to donate, right? You can donate with banks, cards, or credit cards through PayPal. Everything's protected. And the link in my description to PayPal in the bottom of the description is directly to me. Right, so you're not going to accidentally find another Dana Durnford because they were out there. Let me just bring that up for 1 second because this is my last show. This is the show we're watching right now. Let me show you how you can donate to help out. I don't know if I need to clean the slate anyway and get rid of all my expenses so that if I can claw my way back, I'm not saddled with a burdensome. So PayPal, I don't think you can use my site. They closed that today because I couldn't renew it. I couldn't afford to. And so if you go to PayPal, if you click on that link, that'll take you to my PayPal. Dana Durnford, right? And so you just scroll down, you'll find that. Let's keep going here. Hello, everybody. Oh, we got a few people tonight, don't we? 35 likes. That's the best number I've seen this year. That's pretty awesome. Bless your hearts out there. Everything's dying, dead, and dead. It's kind of a sad day for me because I can't deny what's happening to me, right? I've suffered so much trying to keep this whole operation. And all the people, what really bothers me is all the people that supported me, right? And I don't want all that support to be in vain. Because a lot of people sacrifice so we can do the things we're doing. And, I can't look around me without seeing that, right? That's indelibly imprinted into me everywhere I look because this operation took an enormous amount of just love from this planet to pull off. The worst wildlife die-off ever recorded anywhere on Earth underway on the West Coast. And you know what? I still haven't given, and I would love to start doing the presentations in the universities next weekend or the weekend after. I still want to be able to do that at least once in the hopes that we can catch a spark. I refuse to give up, but unfortunately, I'm not in a very good shape now, am I? Once they took my pension away 3 weeks ago, I started up 2 companies in desperation. I never got a phone call. How bizarre is that? They're good companies. They would have covered the expenses every month, no problem. But I don't even get a phone call. Am I being blocked, I wonder? And we're not just talking marine die-offs. Yeah, it's a big deal. There are many, many species that are getting sick, facing a possibility of extinction. And so they say some sort of toxin. I'm not sure what year this one was. Yeah, 2016. They were speculating, right? But again, the acknowledgement, the consensus of all the reports up to 2016 was they've never seen nothing like it. They don't know what it is, and they were just speculating. But X-ray-like images show a radioactivity spread throughout the bodies of Fukushima. Well, clearly it's not just Fukushima. This is going to be symmetrical worldwide. If you X-ray the bodies of the species that are left, you're going to find them full of man-made anthropogenic radiation. But all the trees and all the species in Japan were showing radiation, severe radiation poisoning. Here you go, the one about the trees. I couldn't help but feel pity for the trees and plants and everything else. And fruit trees is all the same. X-ray-like images show spread of radioactivity equivalent of miscarriages, stillbirths, malformations. Cesium remains dispersed throughout the water column from the surface to the ocean floor. From the surface to the ocean floor. This is 2012, folks. Now, you just can't have cesium. And I showed you the plumes from the French government. These weren't models. These were spikes at 1 million to 10 million times pre-Fukushima levels, which are catastrophic numbers, right? There you go. Darlene said it, right? You used to smell the ocean miles before you got to it. It's an astounding statement, by the way. And that there's no truer words than that story, that acknowledgement right there. So cesium, that means plutonium, uranium, americium, neptunium, and everything else remains dispersed throughout the water column from the surface to the ocean floor. And that was writers. Fukushima radiation still circling the globe. Levels are consistently rising and falling in a 40-day cycle. So the whole planet is buried in radioactive fallout. And they say that, like, if you put anything into the upper atmosphere, it could take 10, 20 years to wash out, all of it to wash out. If you just had just one event, not event, but one dispersal into the upper atmosphere. We're talking about, you got 1,000 fuel pools hemorrhaging into the atmosphere every day worldwide, and you had a pulse event at Japan. Japan was the straw that broke the planet's back, and 8 million species back, and humanity's back. That's the ultimate. Like, I run an educational program, so it's no good. There's no need for me to exaggerate, because you can't make up the documentation that I provide for you. You just, and tonight is different, kind of like in the context of document. But you can't make up the stuff I'm showing you tonight. Let's put it that way. If I was to write a fictional book, I couldn't have pre-Fukushima made up a story like this is what I'm trying to say. Does that make any sense? I don't know. I'm a little bit skittish tonight. I apologize. New contamination map showed cesium-137 deposited 900 kilometers from Fukushima, west of Hiroshima. New model showed the west coast covered in Fukushima fallout a week after, which means every species was buried under radioactive fallout. As 2014, after 3/11, the public is anything but safe outside of the evacuation zone. Radiation doses at 50,000 microsieverts, 50 millisieverts, in 7 days for people living 100 miles away as possible. It was so much worse than that, unfortunately. And the industry can't contain the radiation from the fuel pools. So ultimately, this was going to happen anyway to the planet. But they built their reactors on the coastline, say less than 100 miles from the tectonic plates, the tectonic plates that does that. So they're 100 miles away. They're a lot closer than that, but at best they're 100 miles away. And they have 1,000 plus significant earthquakes there every year. So why would you build? They have a 3,000-year history of tsunamis on that coastline, significant tsunamis up to 300 feet high. And at the 300 feet high in the communities, they're on the trails, old trails, they have markers etched into the rock face. Don't build your homes below this level, because past tsunamis have showed that the ocean will eventually come in here and will wipe everything out. But yet they still choose to build it right on the basically 100 miles is the equivalent of building your reactors on the tectonic plates. Right? And so the earthquakes they had there is not the first time they've ever had a massive earthquake like that in that exact same spot. It's not the second time, it's not the third time, it's not the 1,000th time. A massive earthquake. Because they're right they're facing the tectonic plates. You're right alongside of it. Data not released to the public in very high doses to children. So the U.S. government controversy after U.S. government estimates show 40,000 microsievert thyroid dose for California infants from Fukushima. 40,000 microsievert thyroid. So think of each microsievert as at least 750 atoms, man-made atoms. And think of each atom, so multiply 40,000 by 750. Now, this can't be true just for children. It's going to be true for insects and birds and mammals and animals, or, well, anything with a thyroid gland, right? 8 million species. And not only that, because how radiation works, you can't just have gamma in the thyroid, right? You're going to have neutrons and betas and alphas. And they're going to pulse energy, each of them, at their own frequency, their own speeds. And they're all basically almost the speed of light each second. So they can't mingle. So gammas and neutrons and betas and alphas don't mingle with each other, so to speak. They don't pass through each other. When they hit each other almost at the speed of light, they reflect. And that effect is known as a X-ray. And so all the species in your forests and your meadows are getting full body X-rays. And those species can't survive, neither can you eventually, but those species, because you reproduce so many times, become sterile and stop reproducing. And so this is why we're seeing the die-offs, we're seeing the way they're playing out today, it's not just X-rays per se, right? It's the fact that you have this toxicity symmetrically throughout your entire, only 25% of the planet is landmass, right? And radiation is liberated through the ocean, through the waves crashing on the shorelines, through the tens of thousands of miles of rain clouds produced over the ocean each day that comes to your coastlines. Data not released to the public. It's not a very high dose to the children, it's a catastrophic dose. And so it causes all kinds of autoimmune triggers and diseases. Iodine-131 detected in Austria, Czech Republic, Hungary. So they like using iodine because it has a short half-life. So a lot of people get dissuaded quite quickly because, it's got a short half-life. But if you got iodine-131, you got plutonium, uranium, americium, neptunium, strontium, and every other conceivable type of isotope. Elevated radiation also in Germany, Sweden, Slovakia. UK experts claim iodine very unlikely from Fukushima since it was so many months ago. Well, because it's an ongoing chain reaction, it's always producing iodine. Now, Poland, Denmark reported radioactive dust. International Atomic Energy official were a little concerned. But their job is to promote nuclear, not denigrate it, right? And so their job now is to cover it up, and that's what they're doing. The head of the Fukushima health study, the guy in charge of the health of the people in the Fukushima prefecture, was insane. That's the only way to 100 millisieverts, which is 100,000 microsieverts, is okay for pregnant moms. This is unconscionable. Somebody would say something like that, by the way. And that the effects of radiation do not come to people that are happy, they come to people that are weak-spirited. Well, there's a lot of happy people out there tonight that I'm at a business, right? You'd be surprised how many people in the nuclear industry are going to be out partying tonight and dancing, and they're going to be out there just... Tomorrow there's going to be a huge celebration in all the pro-nuclear communities. I'm not kidding you. There's zero possibility they don't know who I am. Zero possibility they're not going to celebrate. It's zero possibility. You got to realize how prolific. I have produced more material, unfortunately, than anybody on the planet. And I do it in desperation. I do it in love for this planet. I do it in good faith for this planet. And I do it because it's the right thing to do. And there's no better thing than doing one of these shows. There really isn't. It's a good thing, right? It's something to be proud of. These shows are to push back against the industry. Industry's never ever in its history had anybody come out and do an educational program. It couldn't survive, see? And so we have damaged this industry. We most likely have incapacitated the industry. There is no nuclear renaissance. There is no small modular reactors. There's no fusion. Right? They got the same gigawatts as they had in the early 90s capacity, and they're going down all the time. They're producing less reactors than they're taking offline all the time. We have caused all that to happen. We have informed the policymakers, the investors. Like, everybody should hold their heads high for what we accomplished. We got the moral high ground in every way you look at it. The head of the Fukushima Health Study said the effects of radiation do not come to people that are happy, they come to people that are weak-spirited. In fact, what he said was, it does not come to people that smile. Radiation, if you smile, it can't hurt you. So they're fairly confident the population is incapable of comprehending the enormity of the radiation, right? That's why you would, and they're right, unfortunately, and sadly and horrifyingly. Scientists, the slower you spread radiation doses, the more effectively it produces cancers, heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia, and everything else. And by the way, the species gets all of that too. It's not just humans. And that's just, it's such a sad, in many ways, story, right? The story of radiation and Fukushima, because the world is unaware. They're very complacent, and they're very trusting. And the industry, nuclear industry, is the very last people you want to be trusting. Neptunium 239 decays to plutonium 239. This is 20 days. So in 40 days, the whole planet looks like that with plutonium. And plutonium has this incredible, brutal, it produces 3 different tumors. Three different tumors. Just walk you through it a little bit. It's very important because this will help explain what happened to your loved ones over the last number of years. And, you know, I've been challenged. In the early years, I got challenged with a lot of the pro-nuclear trickery. And so I had to come up with a way. I had to have a folder so that when he showed up again, I can come out and boom, right? And so slowly over a very long, we've been at this a very long time. It seems like forever, even though it's not. But since Fukushima, we've been at this hardcore. Toxicity of inhaled plutonium. Well, I was at it 10 years before Fukushima. Toxicity of inhaled plutonium dioxide in beagle dogs. It was 144 beagle dogs. And the death from the radiation, the plutonium, and remember, this is a plutonium model. It says neptunium, but it decays to plutonium every 2.5 days. There's 10 different decays before, if this was just a single plume. This is a plume covering the entire planet, so it's still hemorrhaging out today, mind you. So death from the radiation, the plutonium, began about 1.5 to 5.4 years after the exposures. Tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, and the liver occurred beginning about 3 years. And bone tumors in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death. Now, all the 144 dogs in this study, which is Dr. Raymond Gilmedi from Loveless Respiratory Research Institute in New Mexico, which is the United States Navy Institute. He's got 93 studies on beagle dogs and puppies and monkeys. Mostly beagle dogs and puppies, make no mistake about it, which is now illegal, by the way. Bone tumors found in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death. Skeleton. So out of the 144 dogs, almost 100 of them died from bone tumors, which is it's a heartbreaking way to see your loved ones pass away, but that's what you're seeing, right? Lung tumors in 46 dogs were the second most common cause of death, and liver tumors in 20 dogs were the cause of death in only 2 dogs. So lung tumors and bone tumors killed all the dogs, basically. But the 2 dogs that died from liver tumors, which occurred later than the tumors in the bones and the lungs, but these tumors in the 3 organs occurred in the same animal. So plutonium causes 3 different types of tumors is what they're telling you. And bone tumors is just about the worst way you can die. These findings in dogs suggest that similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans accidentally exposed to plutonium. Now, the caveat for that was, and I already had that, was it was discovered that the human kidneys are at least 50 times less efficient than an animal kidney at removing the plutonium. In other words, the dogs were 50 times better off than the humans. Not 50%, but 50 times better off than the humans. And so all the dogs died. So we're 50 times more likely to die than the dogs did, and all the dogs died. We're 50 times more likely. It gets worse, unfortunately, because the big curium isotopes are the major byproduct in the irradiated nuclear fuel. Just for 1 minute, forget the fact that it's alpha emitting, because they're going to spin that on you anyway. But the curium isotopes, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for the plutonium isotopes. So curium isotopes is the biggest byproduct of the radioactive fuel rods. So when you see a plutonium, which is theoretically as worse as it can get, unfortunately, curium isotopes, which is the major byproduct of the irradiated, I'm burping as I'm talking, irradiated fuel rods, is 20 times, you need 20 times thicker shielding, lead shielding, than you do for plutonium, which just decays to in 2.5 days. So this is my last video. This is my warning to the world, my cry. This is my sonnet to the planet, I think. Take heed. We didn't do all this work. We didn't sacrifice all these years. We've worked tirelessly and with great pride to inform you and help you come to terms with what happened. And then hopefully by proxy to confront the monster, which is the nuclear industry. And you should. Your loved ones. You know, the cancer epidemic started in the 70s after all that nuclear testing. It's a nuclear war, but they call it testing for some reason. They just blew up the weapons in your own country instead of somebody else's country. The radioactive fallout and the damage is the same as a nuclear war. There's no difference. I wonder what the nuclear industry is going to do now that they don't have a boogeyman anymore to pick on. How's that going to play out? They took away my pension. I started up 2 businesses, never got a single phone call in the last 3 weeks in desperation to try to keep this operation alive. I'm desperate, and anybody who's here regularly knows how desperately I've been trying to get out to research the birds and the whales to do field studies, and we can't fund that. I can't even get the boat working. My motor's been to Alaska 6 times. It beat to death up there. Now it's down here, been beat to death, and we almost had it working. Fukushima Hospital, but it doesn't matter anymore now, does it? It's not that I'm giving up. It's just that I'm facing reality that I got to find a way to survive. I'll be homeless in 2 weeks. After all these years, I'm going to be homeless in 2 weeks. It's a hard pill to swallow. It is what it is, but it doesn't mean I'm going to go away or give up. I mean, for a while, clearly, this is going to be catastrophic for me, but it's a dirty thing they've done, and we expect no less. That's what they do. They're good at it, too. Fukushima hospital worker says 5 of the 7 babies were born with birth defects, Down syndrome. The first studies they do after a nuclear accident is Down syndrome and autism. Down syndrome and autism. Let's just talk about that. We still got a little bit of time left here. Let's talk about some of that stuff. Because I want to put some mixes in here, because as this is my last show, unless we raise enough money to keep it moving for another month, then it'll be my last show. But I mean, we're in real, it doesn't get any dire straight than it is now for me, that's for sure. I'll run out of food in a week, for goodness sakes. The whole story is absurd, isn't it? They finally got me, man. They got me good, too. There's nothing I can do about it. Okay, so just bear with me. There we go. I'm in shock, right? I'm still in shock. When my second appeal failed, it was just, how is this even possible? And I get a no reply email. You can't even reply. No, too bad. Drop dead, scumbag. Let's try this again. All right, here we go. It's crazy, right? That doesn't look great. Let's go with that. Yeah, they succeeded. Beyond their wildest dreams, I bet. Must be quite the coup to know that I'm going to be homeless. They must be yucking it up there right now. Enjoy it. You worked hard for it, I'm sure. The influences of the post-Chernobyl fallout and birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. So Chernobyl was a small reactor. It was a new reactor. It was a graphite reactor. And it didn't have decades of reactor cores at the top of the buildings like Japan's reactor. Japan's reactors were pure uranium, pure plutonium. Each reactor was equal to about 100 Chernobyls. And we assumed they lost at least 36 reactor cores in the 8 fuel pools at Fukushima, not counting the common spent fuel pool, or something from number 6. And you have to look that up on my site to appreciate it. The which is the 736 mystery pictures video. You watch that, then you'll appreciate what I'm talking about. It's very significant. The influence of the post-Chernobyl fallout and birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. Trends in human sex odds at birth in Europe and the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident. Now, most people, if you go to Wikipedia everywhere else or UN and whatever, they're not going to tell you that they closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom. Right? They're not going to tell you that. From radioactive fallout. They're not going to tell you to close the freshwater fishery for 30 years in Sweden. They're going to tell you 28 people died because of Chernobyl. And it's completely dishonest. In fact, why would you do a study on the sex odds of birth in Europe after Chernobyl? Because what happens with radioactive fallout over a huge population is they produce more boys than girls. And this is true for all the species, which means you have less species being produced in the future because you have more boys than females, right? But when you do human sex studies, sex odd studies, male to female ratios, is because they're looking for that specific attribute. Prenatal loss of 400 male fetuses in the Czech Republic. Secondary sex ratio trends in associated gender-specific births near nuclear facilities in France and Germany. So these are not meltdowns, these are just nuclear facilities, but yet they're doing a very wide study to see if they're getting more males than females. And this is how they quantify that a running nuclear power plant with no meltdowns has poisoned the entire population. But they're not going to like come out and tell you that's why they're doing it. But it's clear when you look at what I'm going to show you. Non-thyroid cancers in northern Ukraine, because you'd like to say that the only cancers were thyroid. And so these studies were showing non-thyroid cancers. It's very dishonest industry, by the way, for the health effects. Congenital abnormality registry in Belarus because of Chernobyl. Cancer incidences in Finland after Chernobyl from radioactive fallout. Down syndrome clusters in January 1987 in Belarus linked with the Chernobyl. What else could it be? Now, the industry, they do these studies when there's a nuclear accident because they know that is the attribute that's going to show up first, is Down syndrome and autism. Chernobyl fallout and prenatal mortality in United Kingdom, England and Wales. They closed 9,400 farms after Chernobyl, which meant all of Europe had to be contaminated for the radiation to make its way all the way to Chernobyl, England and Wales. Chromosomes aberration in Norwegian reindeer following the Chernobyl accident. You still can't eat the meat from Lappia reindeer because the reindeer, and a lot of these populations for thousands of years have raised reindeers, right? And they can't eat the food, even though they let them once a year or something. Assessment of the influence of Chernobyl and birth defects, abortion rates. So whatever we're seeing for Chernobyl, you need to magnify it by about 3,600. Right, multiply it by 3,600, and then you're looking at what Fukushima originally caused, not counting the ongoing emissions. Estimated lifetime effective dose to hunters and their families in the 3 most contaminated countries in Sweden, counties in Sweden after Chernobyl. Estimated lifetime effective dose to hunters and their families. All of these studies were meant to downplay Chernobyl, by the way. And they're like, oh, it's like a banana, and oh, it's like a potato chip, and oh, it's like walking in the sunshine, and oh, it's like climbing a mountain, and oh, it's like sleeping next to somebody, oh, it's like flying on an airplane, oh, and yeah, I already exhausted all appeals. Today was the last appeal. And I rent, right? So I can't meet the rent in a week's time. So I'm finished. That's the end of Dana. Differences in effects of radiation on abundance of animals. I like to raise enough money to cover my expenses, which is going to be around $1,600, to get rid of all of my bills, like so that if I do manage to claw my way back, I won't be going into a house with no light and power, no phones, or no internet, right? That's my final wish I'm wishing for. I don't know what to say, right? It is what it is. I'm under an enormous amount of stress in the last 3 weeks. I've been trying to hide it, but it is what it is. The industry got me good, man. Went through both appeals. I lost both appeals. And the worst of it all, they sent you this no reply. No, your appeal is denied, and you can't even reply. It's a very it's a surreal feeling, actually. Difference in effects of radiation on the abundance of animals in Fukushima, Chernobyl. Chernobyl Tissue Bank was Geraldine Thomas. She should be arrested for crimes against humanity for what she's doing to children in the United Kingdom with radiation. It's unconscionable. And she's notorious for going around the world doing presentations on Fukushima, saying it's like a banana. She always says, I got more radiation on the plane here than I did at the nuclear meltdowns. That's one of her famous lines you're ever going to hear. Incidences of legal abortion in Sweden after Chernobyl. So when you start looking at all of these studies, why were they doing it now? If you go back into my videos and look at the Chernobyl anniversary videos, say like 3 years ago and 2 years ago, you're going to get around 900 of these studies. So they study every facet of the ecosystem, every species, and all the human attributes, because that's where the radiation shows up, see? And imagine how much money it takes to cover, which is only a fraction of the studies that we've covered over this many, many, many years of doing this. Legally induced abortions in Denmark after Chernobyl. You see abortions everywhere, right? Because of birth defects. And these pictures I'm going to bring up for you are going to be a little bit hard on you. I would imagine. But I'm going to show you some pictures of Chernobyl, and then you can appreciate why you've seen these types, these studies with these attributes, right? Excuse me. There we go. I'm just going to show you some of the craziest ones. Well, everything is crazy. So the reason that you're seeing all of those studies about abortions is because there's just dozens of orphanages in Chernobyl or Ukraine with these abandoned children. And this is a foundation from United Kingdom, I believe, somewhere in the UK. And what they do is they pay for thousands of open heart surgeries for children to try to correct congenital heart diseases. These children are abandoned, so the nuclear industry has abandoned all of these children too. And these children, when you ask them what would they like, if they can have one thing, what would they want? They would say a radio or a TV, so they can have something to do because they have nothing to do. And they might have 50 of these children per nurse. And so this foundation, this wonderful foundation in the United Kingdom, will go down and take like hundreds of these kids to United Kingdom, say for Christmas, to give them at least 2 weeks, for the first time in their entire lives, out of this mortifying, horrifying existence that the nuclear industry created. So the reason you see all these studies on pregnancy and abortions is because there's this incredible legacy of what just Chernobyl. Now remember, Fukushima is at least 3,600 times worse than Chernobyl. So that's why you're seeing these types of studies here. Delayed effects of accidental radiation exposure 15 years after Chernobyl. Pregnancy outcomes in Norway. Infant mortality in West Germany before and after Chernobyl. Trends in birth and birth-sex ratios in the vicinity of research reactors. They're very low output reactors, but they're doing those studies because you can't contain the emissions. All nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation from their fuel pools. And when I say hemorrhaging radiation, if you could see it, it looks like a snowstorm all day, every day. And that's why almost every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. That's right, almost every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. And so they can whisk the radiation away from the site and put it into your loved ones from the supermarket. It's an agenda worldwide. And any industry that cruel will celebrate the fact that they finally got rid of meat, I can assure you. Human sex ratio at birth and residential proximity to nuclear facilities in France. Human sex ratio at birth and residential. So you see a lot of those studies, right? Why are they doing that? Because that's what radiation does. Chernobyl cover-up. There was tens of thousands of documents that disappeared in about, I think it was the first year or the second year. Tens of thousands of documents and studies had disappeared. There was 5,000 studies that were turned into a report from a New York Medical Institute, where they estimated 1 million people died worldwide shortly after Chernobyl. Radioactive fallout and neural tube defects. So they know the effects of anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout. There's no illusion about this. There is to the people who don't know any better, and to everybody that doesn't watch this video will have that delusion that they don't know. They'll always say, well, there's very little known about radioactive fallout. That's one of their favorite comments. There's very little known about radioactive fallout. Let me just see if I can find, this was from MIT University. I covered that presentation of their original reply to Fukushima melting down. Just let me see if I can find it, because I got a pretty good eye. It's a very short clip. It's amazing when I look at all the stuff that I've produced, and like clips and videos and everything that I put together over the years. Now that we're at this moment in time, I'm quite proud of everything I produced. I'm very, 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 very proud of everything I produced about this. And I couldn't have done it without everybody helping. Maybe this is it here. This could be. The problem is I produce so much, I might never find that one tonight. One more try. Yeah, I don't know. I'll just try one more trick. Still got a few tricks up my sleeve. Bear with me. See if I get lucky, lucky. No. Is this one going to make me lucky? Yeah, it could be here. There it is. Will this one play? Yeah, we're in there. Score. This is Jacqueline Yates. She's a radiation expert. And this was MIT, which is full of nuclear academics. So instead of using one of their academics, they brought her in on a very shitty phone call to explain the health effects. Now, she's going to say very little is known about the effects of radiation on a human, and that all the effects are based on a healthy 25-year-old or something. But when you look at all these studies, do you really think she's telling the truth?
Possibly on the phone, although I don't see a phone, Jackie Yanch, who's in Spain. Jackie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Fantastic. Until last year, Jackie was a professor in the Department of Nuclear Science and Engineering. She continues to be affiliated with us, and she's a specialist on radiation health effects.
I'm here. I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
The question had to do with what are the prospects for long-term contamination in the area around the reactor. I think that was the question.
In terms of the amount of release or the consequences of a release? I mean, there's been very little that seems to have been released and dispersed beyond the containment. Now, unfortunately, we have very little data, almost no data about how much radiation we can live with in terms of elevated background levels. All of our data about the health effects of radiation come from a situation in which all the doses delivered in less than a minute. And so we just don't know how much radiation can be, what kind of contamination level can be considered safe. I mean, some parts of the world are at natural dose rates which are 40 times the dose rates we're living with, 40 times the dose rate Japan has as a natural background level, and no adverse effects have been noted. But as I say, there has not been a careful study of just how much is too much. And there's going to be a trade-off between having people leave their homes forever or for long periods of time and living with an elevated background level. And we don't know whether, we don't really know, like I said, how much is too much to live with.
I think many of our students may not know that there's a long history of close ties between MIT and Japan.
And so she's saying none of these studies exist. None of this documentation exists. And then she conflated it with Iran's natural stuff, which is not made by nuclear meltdowns. We're already acclimated to it through genetic superior selection. And so they brought her in on the phone when they had hundreds and hundreds of nuclear scientists at MIT to tell those lies. But those lies, of course, when you find someone like myself, don't hold any water. Those bottles of Loy's don't hold any water, because I can show you endless, and I mean it. I must have 60,000 studies or something. In fact, I know I have 60,000 because that was many years ago. I had stopped counting at that point. And I do all of this, like, I know it sounds weird, but because the industry will attack me and they'll say, well, Dana's lying to you about this because it's like, you know, this stuff is irrelevant. It's like a banana and everything else. And you got to dig up the documentation so that they can never do that and get away with it again, right? Because I can come out and say it, but it's not the same as showing you, right? It's not the same as me showing you. And so one of the hardest thing for me to ever do was always to go in and look at these studies, because you get 10, 20, 30,000 studies of different things they're studying because of radioactive fallout. What does that tell you? It tells you radiation fallout permeates into everything and it harms everything. They're not spending that money for something to do. Dental abnormalities in people living in radionuclides contaminated region. So not all of Great Britain has crooked teeth, just certain areas where there was heavy radioactive dumping and fallout, right? You know what I'm saying? Because it's like Britain, in one sense, is famous for bad teeth, right? But it's not true. Not all of Britain is like that. These areas were heavily poisoned by Windscale. Windscale had massive nuclear meltdown. They're still hemorrhaging 8 million liters a day into the Atlantic Ocean, by the way, from a plutonium mixed oxide meltdown in 1957. Abnormal retinal pigment, a major determinant for radiation-induced congenital eye defects. Leukemia incidences after. It's not just leukemia. There's heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid. Effects of radiation on the reproductive system. We're still going. We're almost finished now. Prenatal radiation-induced brain and cognitive impairments. Human sex ratio at birth after atmospheric weapons testing. Think about that study there. That would blow your mind. Down syndrome in Scotland. From, you guessed it, Chernobyl. Schizophrenia. So, like, there's many, many illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. Arnie Gunnarsson lied to you and told you the fuel pools were intact. He made the racks for the fuel assemblies for the fuel pools for 70 identical reactors. This is 10 million atoms of cesium-137 per cubic meter of air. The entire planet. An invisible snowstorm, a man-made anthropogenic radioactive fallout covering the entire planet. That is really something. And I mean, they're growing food right alongside the 1-ton bags of radioactive fallout. What does that tell us? They're harvesting it for sale, grown in a nuclear wasteland right alongside the 1-ton bags of radiation. And this is where they picked up some of those 1-ton bags, which is just topsoil. You can't decontaminate anything from man-made radiation, let alone landmass. Malformed babies being declared as stillbirths and miscarriages, not included in the statistics. The whole story is just full of madness, isn't it? Lying is so natural. It seems to be it's their only solution, right? They've got 80 years of manipulating and deceiving and tricking people, and people become complacent. And then this is a video, we got about another 10 minutes to go. This video was 2013, and they're talking about the 1,000 tanks. They said the 1,000 tanks were full in 2013. There is no filtration system, by the way. The ELP system, the Areva system, the Siri system, the Curie systems for filtering radiation can't work because the filter becomes saturated within 20 minutes with gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas, and there's thousands of sieverts. It would be there within a few hours. So that would melt down, is what would happen. So you couldn't do it. Not only that, you couldn't change the filter. because these kind of doses we're talking about, they're pouring water over a melted reactor core and then sucking that water up, allegedly. And if you put that into the tank, it settles, it'll burn a hole through the bottom of the tank, through a criticality chain reaction, rather. This video is very important. It's only a short video, but TEPCO acknowledges in 2013 they have zero control over the water.
Fukushima plant sits smack in the middle of an underground aquifer. Deep beneath the ground, the site is rapidly being overwhelmed by water. Beneath the surface, water flows downhill and into the basement of the damaged reactor buildings. There it is contaminated with high levels of radiation. To stop the groundwater flowing on into the nearby ocean, engineers are building an underground barrier. But that is causing the groundwater level to rapidly rise. It's now so high the water will soon reach the surface. Then it will start flowing overground into the sea. This week, the company that owns Fukushima, TEPCO, made this disturbing admission.
We understand that this water discharge is beyond our control, and we do not think the current situation is good.
Outside experts say it's now clear TEPCO is incapable of handling the cleanup at Fukushima. It's time for the Japanese government to step in. The situation is already beyond what TEPCO can handle, he says. If it were possible to take proper measures, they would have done it already. It's not as if TEPCO is refusing to do what they can. They're doing everything they can, but there are no perfect solutions. Even if the government does step in, it's not clear what it can do. The only other solution is to pump out the contaminated groundwater and put it in storage tanks. But after just 2 years, the site is already jammed with more than 1,000 giant tanks. Most of them are already full up. At least 400 tons of new water pours into the site every day, and it's going to continue for years and years. Fukushima's water crisis has only just begun. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News in Tokyo.
And then a few months later, he claimed he was on top of the building you're looking at, 190 feet in the air. But that's a pretty candid story right there, right? Well, I guess it's that time. We'll call it a night, I suppose. I don't know what to say, you know. We'll get a few more shows in, I guess. But officially, this is the last show. I'm packing now to... You know, it's crazy that we reached this point. We should be getting ready to go to the universities and challenge the industry right in the institutions. That was the big dream over the last couple of weeks. We were going to do it, and that was it. And I was working hard towards it, trying to do everything I could to keep this whole operation going forward. And many other people have sacrificed so much for it. I'm still in shock, so that this has happened. Not much I can do about it. My dream right now is to raise around $1,600. That'll cover my rent, to pay off my bills, and it'll give me time to try to make something happen in the next. That'll give me an extra 4 weeks, basically. And the only way you can donate right now, as far as I know, is through PayPal. The link I showed you earlier in the video, but it's in the bottom of my description. It's directly to me, to Dana Durnford. And that's the best way, too, because... and you don't need a bank account to donate. You can just go to PayPal, and you can go ahead and donate to that link with credit cards or bank cards. And this is PayPal. You're not going to have an issue with it, right? So it's up to you folks now, I would imagine. But I'll be packing all weekend. I can't leave it for the last minute. I'm not very healthy anyway, right? I got no idea what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what to do. I do know that that's the cards I'm dealt, and that's just the way it is. And now that they got rid of my pension, which just doesn't even seem real, that they were able to do that one. It doesn't surprise me, I guess, but that's what they got done to me, so all I can do is hope for a miracle. You know, if we had a big foundation that would just fund this operation each month, we can change the world for better. That's not an opinion either. That's a fact. If we had a big foundation that could afford to throw $5,000 at this operation, we can move forward. But right, you need like $6,000 or $7,000 a month to really keep this whole operation and the research going. And is that too much? Is the truth? Is the truth worth something anymore? Does it, you know, you got all these the biggest medias on the planet are all promoting small modular reactors that don't exist and fusions that don't exist. And I done a video last night mostly on geothermal. I explained in the first 20 minutes or something how geothermal could actually be utilized. And that video never got no views at all. It's very unusual to get no views on a video. But it was a really good video. And I done that video on purpose because I knew I was down to the wire today and I was worried sick, and then my worst nightmares came true. But the best part of this story is that we punched in all these years, that we punched in all this research, that we provided and produced all this material. That is a win, right? So don't be sad. That is a win. We hurt this industry. We mortally wounded this industry. And so that's something to be proud of. That's something to rejoice in. That's something that they can never take away from us. And what they done to me is the most cowardly thing imaginable. And what are they going to do with no opposition, right? Okay, so we are, I'm probably going to end up having to do some fundraisers. It might be 5-6 hour shows, so we're not finished yet. I'm not planning on going away easy. I'm going to fight right till the very last day to raise enough money to keep this operation moving forward. I don't know how to quit. I'm being forced out, chased out, and it's just wrong what they done to me. That's wrong. So will you be proud that good people like me and you did fight for this planet despite the overwhelming odds? We hurt this industry. We mortally wounded this industry, I can tell you that much. And the world's a better place because you exist and we done this together. That's a fact. And so we're going to leave you with Nuclear Exceptionalism is the song for tonight. James Lucid has produced a prodigious amount of documentation. On YouTube, he's got over 350 songs, anti-nuclear songs. We're going to play one of them for you. We started the show off with one of his songs. And don't forget to donate if you can. And we'll see you. There are other shows coming before I move out of here. I have nowhere to move to, but before I move out of this place, we still got internet connection. We are still going to punch back the best we can. But it doesn't look good. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. A great day tomorrow. And thank you so much. And hugs for everybody that has supported this little voice in the dark. You take care. God bless.
They said it was clean, too cheap to meter. Built the dome, then cooked the beaker. Said the rod was safe, sealed in drums, but left them leaking out of Idaho slums. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear's not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won. Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism is done. They chase the sun, all fusion proud. Ignore the barrels stacked in clouds. Promise stars in every socket, while curium settled in the market. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear's not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won. Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism is done. Chart is clean, while whales rolled up beside the submarine. Blame the algae, blame the rain, but never trace the gamma chain. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear's not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won. Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism is done. Now the rods are rusting, the record spins. Mama warned them, too many sins. Keep your son, keep your lab coat pride, till you fix the waste you tried to hide. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear's not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won. Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism